majority of our students are actually getting hired and interviewing prior to graduation. During their interviews, the interviewer might say, hey, do you have experience with this, or do you have experience with that? And my students, based on this lab, can say, yes, I have done that.
Today, we're joined by Jeff Johnston. He is the program director and instructor of the Computer Information Systems Department of North Georgia Technical College. He earned his BS in Business Administration with a concentration in Computer Information Systems from Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama, and his MS degree in Information Sciences from the University of South Alabama. He has worked in private industry for various organizations for over 20 years. Prior to his employment at North Georgia Technical College, he taught at various colleges and universities and holds multiple industry certifications from Microsoft, Amazon, Cisco, and CompTIA. Additionally, he is a combat veteran, serving for 20 years with the Georgia Army National Guard and Marine Corps Reserve. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Hey, Becky, I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I would love for you really to start right off the bat, giving us a moment, or give yourself a moment to share with us what your role is at North Georgia Technical College and how you first discovered the U.S. Cyber Range.
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the program director and I'm an instructor for the CS department. So primarily what that does is I'm just responsible for the curriculum and developing it and making sure that our current curriculum aligns with our service area needs. That's it. I teach a lot of the classes. We have two programs. We have networking specialist in cybersecurity, and I primarily teach cybersecurity classes.
You're saying that is the program rather a little bit newer at North Georgia? Is that right?
Yes. So we just started our program. Actually, I think it's at the 1-year anniversary. So this is only 1 year. Fortunately, we had a lot of our networking students that kind of transferred over. That gave us a good starting point, and enrollment has done nothing but increased over that year. So the program's looking good. We've been doing it for a year.
Wonderful. Talk about the process when, you're only a year in, but talk about that process of when you're like, okay, hey, we need something like the U.S. Cyber Range. We need this hands-on learning experience, and how you took that U.S. Cyber Range and integrated it into your existing curriculum.
Yeah, that's a good conversation. So long story short, I'd wanted to create this program for a long time. I actually came from another school where they had a very large cybersecurity program. So as soon as I got here, I already had it kind of in mind that I wanted to start the cybersecurity program. And when I did, I was experimenting with a lot of things, more specifically in the labs. How do I, load these operating systems, or create this environment, or load these tools? And it became extremely cumbersome. I realized it was going to be very difficult to manage along with all of my other duties, in other words, teaching and administrative functions. And so it kind of occurred to me, and of course everyone's familiar with cyber ranges, but it kind of occurred to me that was really the solution. So like everyone else, the first thing I did was started hitting the internet, started exercising my Google searches, and came up with a long list of cyber ranges that were available. And the U.S. Cyber Range at the Virginia Tech facility stood out to me. And then when I started researching, I said, well, I want to go down this path and look into this. And so obviously I evaluated a lot of them, but at the end of the day, that's the route I decided to go.
I'm curious, did you ever think of just building your own range? Was that even an option on the table?
It was never an option for us. We're a very small school. We're located in the North Georgia mountains. We don't have the numbers, that a metro college might have, and therefore obviously don't have the money. So I knew the funding wasn't going to be there, but more importantly, even if I could get a grant or some sort of funding, I knew that it was going to be cumbersome and time consuming to manage that. I mean, I considered, what I need a lab manager, what I need some teaching assistants, what I need for someone to come in and do that on-prem, as they say, right, on premises. And that conversation didn't even last that long, because I was like, this is not going to work. So obviously the U.S. Cyber Range, with its flexibility and the ability for me to change environments, was really the solution for us.
Kind of in flow with that thought process, scalability was a major aspect of the build for the U.S. Cyber Range when it was first created. Um, doing it in the cloud, so you could go from 10 people to 10,000, and it wouldn't crash a system or a server, was a big aspect of it. And just from your point of view as an educator using it in the classroom, how do you see scaling its use to grow and evolve the curriculum that you're building in a year into as you move forward?
And I can tell that from the cyber range. I could tell that scalability was pretty much the focus point. I mean, I can spin up a US cyber range platform, if you will, for one or two students. Like, for example, if it was some sort of um, you know individual class or something, or I could have 10, 20, 50, 100 students. So obviously, I'm certain that the scalability is there, and I will never get to those numbers. I mean, again, we're a smart school, but what I particularly am more interested in is how I can scale it across my entire department, or maybe even other departments within the college. So I mentioned earlier, we do have that networking specialist program. Well, now we're looking at ways how can we incorporate that into that program as well, not to mention some of the other programs here on the campus.
Actually, I was just talking to an IT security officer for our podcast. It was last month, and he was talking about how he's been in the field for 50 years. We joked, of course, he started when he was only 5. But he mentioned all the things from these mainframes, these huge systems to the cloud, and just all of the changes that he has seen. And one of the things I thought was really interesting that he talked about was kind of what you're talking about across departments, that experiential cybersecurity learning. He was like, it is expanding by leaps and bounds well beyond those traditional computer science departments. And, he's like, who used it even 10 years ago, much less, well, it wasn't even a thing 50 years ago, but, 10 and 5 years ago to where it is now, so many more departments are using it because cybersecurity just touches everything. And along those lines, could you expand on just what you're seeing at North Georgia Technical College, which departments or courses you would see incorporating hands-on cybersecurity training?
Yeah, I mean, that hands-on knowledge for the student is really key, because obviously I think there's a lot of research that shows that's really how they retain that knowledge versus a lecture or something like that. But to be fair, we've only just begun scratching the surface on this cyber range. Like I said, we've only had a cybersecurity program for a year, and I've only used it for this past semester, so since the beginning of spring. So my next bet, or my next avenue, is to increase its use amongst the courses in the cybersecurity program. And then, as I previously mentioned, maybe transition it over to our networking specialist. Now, could I envision our other departments using it? Absolutely. But I think it would maybe either parallel or take the place of some of the other cybersecurity training that they're already doing just as state employees in general. I don't know specifically how some of our trades or others, would utilize the range.
Right, right. And obviously, everyone would have their own opinion based on what their actual curriculum is, which is something that I think is so nice because it is so flexible and the user experience so adaptable to whatever program you're teaching. And whether it's in medical and health administration or straight up computer science, cyber, agriculture is another big one that I just
Right.
think it's so interesting to see. People think, oh, farmers, they go out, they plant their crops and they move on. But there is a huge cybersecurity aspect to that, all of that. Um, Talk about the learning outcomes. And this is a question I like to ask everyone when I talk to them in this podcast. And I know, again, you're a little bit newer, so it's not like you have these big year-over-year trend lines that you can share. But when you talk about implementing that hands-on training through the range, do you have any specific learning outcomes? Either usually ask that have improved, but for you, what learning outcomes were you hoping to get as you wrap up this semester?
Well, the primary focus, and first of all, I could talk about the curriculum at the range. That's to be discussed, but the primary focus was to give my students that learning that you talked about, the hands-on learning, with all of these tools. I specifically taught a penetration testing and ethical hacking class, and so for me to install every little tool, or to ensure that every little application on Kali Linux is working in the physical lab, that's a lot of time. And so Yes, my outcomes were specifically get the students using those tools. And as we know, there's a ton of tools out there, and it's just so easy to spin it up on a platform on the range. If I want them to have Kali Linux or some other distribution of Linux or Windows environment or something else, or do I want Metasploit or how many different targets do we want? Everything is just easily created. I decided to do it on a weekly basis, so I would spin them up a platform every week, and we would work in that specific platform for that week. And then at the end of the week, we would change it. But it's just extremely scalable, but extremely flexible as well.
What reaction do you see from students? And this is something I think of just so I own my own company, but then I also teach, not full time, but I am an adjunct professor. And I can 100% tell you when a student is engaged and excited, as you know, and on the days that they're like glazed over and you're like, come on, wake up, pay attention. This is exciting stuff. I think theory is so important to a liberal arts college and just to learning in general, learning the concepts and those theoretical concepts. How do you try to take that though and turn it into that practical application? Like, do you marry those two, or do you focus just mainly on practical application? What do you see from students in those moments of engagement?
Well, I too came from liberal arts college, so I do appreciate the theory, but the way that I've structured it here at North Georgia is that the early classes, I call them freshman classes, are primarily just that. They're the fundamentals, they're the theory, they're the terms, they're the concepts. And then what I primarily do is with the hands-on is the second year or the senior level classes. So that's kind of how we weave in and out of that. That's just basically it. That's how we do it. It proves to be successful. Now, of course, it's not exactly linear in that way, but that's kind of how we use the range and have them experiment with those different tools. But it doesn't do them a whole lot of good to, learn Hydra or something like that when they don't know what an IP address is or something like that. So.
Right. Right. And I think the engagement, you can see it in anyone's face, students or whatnot, when you're talking to somebody. Do you see more engagement just over the years of teaching in general? Maybe not just this semester, but when you bring in a hands-on learning or an experiential platform like the US Cyber Range, I just feel like it energizes students because they're doing something opposed to listening to you do something, which is teach.
So the feedback that I get is, wow, this is cool, or this is fun, or this is exciting. And so that's really the aha moment that I get from my students is, they talk about how much they love the range or like it because every other class they just listen to a lecture. In this class, they're actually doing, the learning that you mentioned. But something I think that we need to talk about as well with the range is now I'm able to take these opportunities and extend it out to the online students as well, because we do have online classes. So you kept saying, when you see it in their faces, well, sometimes I don't always see it. I see it online through their activity, and their feedback through discussions or emails or what have you. So yeah, I think that the feedback that I get from students is really that they get to do versus just listen and learn.
I would love to kind of move our conversation, if you will, into the workforce needs and talking about the hiring gap. Because at the end of the day, that is what higher education is all about. I mean, after you leave high school, if you are still going to continue your education in any form or fashion, it's to prepare you for your career, whatever it is that you choose. When you're talking about the hiring gap specifically in the cybersecurity industry, do you see the hands-on cyber training helping Georgia's workforce needs? Do you think that it will help you graduate those confident students that are ready to take on those careers?
Yeah, 100%. And so what I hear from my students when they actually go on these interviews, because the majority of our students are actually getting hired and interviewing prior to graduation, is I hear from them during their interviews. The interviewer might say, hey, do you have experience with this, or do you have experience with that? And my students, based on this lab, can say, yes, I have done that. I have installed this operating system. I have scanned this, using this tool. I have viewed, packets in Wireshark. I have done this. And so I have them all write it down on their resumes and so forth. This is my experience. This is what I've done. And specifically, we have lab assignments and final projects and whatnot. And so, yes, they're able to translate that in classroom experience, but in reality, it is still experience versus them just going to the employer saying, no, I don't have any. I can tell you a lot about theory.
Right, right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, they're able to say, I've done this, I've done that. I can do this with Linux, or I can do that with Windows, or these are the tools I particularly like. That they really like talking about them, and they can show that they've actually done it.
Do you think, and again, this is early because you are a little bit earlier in this process, but you obviously made the decision to bring this hands-on learning into your classroom for a reason. And when you talk about increasing students' interest in just cybersecurity careers as a whole, and when they actually get to look kind of behind the curtain, so to speak, and get that experience with the tools, like the password cracking tools, like what is it, Hashcat, or John the
On
Ripper,
the Ripper, yeah.
yeah. When you do all of that, do you notice an increase, or do you think more students will start thinking about a career in the cyberspace?
This is ironic because we just did this in class the other day, the John the Ripper exercise and so forth, and the rainbow tables and cracking and so forth. And I tell you what, I don't know if it increases that, but what I do get is all of the students that are taking the classes that correlate to the US Cyber Range, because I don't have it in every class, but they talk. I don't know if it's in the student center or the lunchroom. And so what I get is all of my other students coming to me talking about, man, I heard how cool this was, or I heard how great this was. I can't wait to be in your classes. And so I think it's just kind of a word of mouth thing, but they really love actually seeing the tools in action.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. I just love seeing and hearing about students being engaged, because it's not just about going to class and glazing over. It's about learning. And I know I sound so drab, and I'm sure a student would be like, "We get it." But when they really do get excited about it, it just excites me. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, and so specifically, again, we've only taught this the one semester in ethical hacking, but a lot of feedback that I get from my students is they're like, I really want to try this vulnerability, this scanning tool or this vulnerability assessment tool, but they can't do it from home. So when I let them just go, released on the cyber range, they feel vindicated. They're like, yes, I finally have the reins off. I can go and run and play and do all the things that I've learned about, but I just could not do from home, right? Because the students aren't going to set up a test lab at home, and it just doesn't have the same effect.
What do students look like when they come in the first time and you're like, all right, guys, we're doing the thing. We're going to open this platform up. I gather at the beginning, they might seem a little hesitant. And by the end, they're probably like, we got this, type, type, type. But that's my assumption. What is it? Do you see that confidence level grow through the semester?
It definitely grows through the semester. The first day in class, when you kind of do it, the US Cyber Range makes it so seamless. The students can get logged in, in a matter of minutes. It's not something really elaborate that you have to set up. But you do see the progression from weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 up to week 16 to where they're able to do what I call like a multi-phased attack, where they're going through all the stages of the penetration testing, and they're doing it, without having to give it any thought or without having to go look back in the book, because it's kind of building on itself. So yeah, they're definitely empowered. They've learned, and I can see around week 15 or 16, we get to that final exam and that final project, they're kind of like, wow, now I put it all together. Now I understand what penetration testing is, or ethical hacking is.
I love it. We talked a little bit about, or we did already, about departments and the different areas outside of your traditional computer science or cyber, departments and classes that might use the cyber range. Have you seen any opportunities sharing resources, best practices, taking part in competitions or conferences with technical colleges across Georgia, or just colleges and universities in general across the state, opposed to just campus?
No, we haven't been able to, to get there. That's definitely on the horizon. But I will tell you, we're in the state of Georgia. We have what's called an IFCC, or a faculty committee, that we meet and kind of discuss all the trends for the state, and how we're utilizing technology. And so the cyber range came up at our most recent meeting. So it's definitely going to be something that we're going to incorporate in the future. And now that it's been a success, I don't know if we're the only college in Georgia, or the technical college, but definitely here at North Georgia Technical College, then we plan to incorporate it statewide if possible.
Yeah, I would think too. Tell me your thoughts on this too. Is if it is statewide, then students can transfer. I mean, not that they do, but they do. Students do transfer between higher ed institutions. I would think that that would help them when it comes to standardized hands-on training benefits for students when they transfer between. Maybe they do 2 years at a technical college and then they move on to a 4-year institution. I don't know. I mean, just the different puzzle pieces of how you put together a college education. Do you think there would be some, I don't know, in that conversation, do you ever talk about standardizing hands-on training so that it can come and go with them wherever they transfer?
Yeah, all of the, I think they kind of vaguely refer to all that as like articulation agreements and whatnot, and that's all way above my, um,
Yeah.
job here. But absolutely, of course it wouldn't hurt, but the same skill sets are going to transfer no matter where the student goes. So I would think it would be nothing but beneficial.
Right, right. Where do you, looking ahead, because I always like to kind of, as we wrap up our conversation, look forward and where we hope to be going. And how do you envision the future of cybersecurity education evolving in Georgia's college system? What do you hope to see if we sat down even 5 years from now and had a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I plan to keep with this type of learning. I plan to keep with hands-on. I see nothing but success when you combine both the theory and the fundamentals with the actual practice. And we meet with advisory committees twice a year. They're actual companies from a service area that direct us on how we should form our curriculum and what classes and skills and things we should teach. And we get nothing but feedback from them that, hey, students need to know how to do, need to be able to do, need to be able to use this tool, need to be able to work with these routers, these switches, this iOS. And so that's been the trend that I've heard back from these advisory committees. It's been the trend that I've seen in my profession. So I don't see anything different in the next 5 years. Maybe, on a whole different podcast, we could discuss AI incorporation or something like that. But no, I don't think the tools for learning are going to change.
Comes to my final question. We don't need to talk about AI for an hour because people will start clicking this thing off in a heartbeat. Sorry, everybody. But we won't do it. What is it that excites you most about cybersecurity education as you look in the years to come?
I mean, everywhere you look, Bureau of Labor Statistics, everywhere that you get your data from, the trend is doing nothing but growing. The demand is growing. And as you know, you mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, is that there's a workforce shortage, right? We're not producing enough graduates to fulfill the needs. And you also mentioned that it's no longer a field where students go into cybersecurity for cybersecurity firms, right? Every business, every department, as you mentioned it earlier, requires those cybersecurity skills. So, like you said, agriculture or the trades or what have you. And so, basically, if you think about it, I believe in the future, every business is going to rely more and more on cybersecurity analysts or cybersecurity specialists. And so, of course, they're going to be hiring even more. And so, what excites me the most is just to produce good quality graduates to go fill those jobs.
I love it. And we're doing it right. We're getting it done. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Becky. It was good to be here.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, we've been talking again with Jeff Johnston, Computer Information Systems Program Director and Instructor at North Georgia Technical College. And thanks for listening to NextGen Cyber, the Future of Cybersecurity, a podcast of the U.S. Cyber Range.